So beginning, nervous system turns red. Originally on the Turn to Red EP, it's a snapshot in time of an embryonic Killing Joke and self-produced. Obviously an enormous landmark for the band's first single, but were you still finding your feet at this point?
Still finding our feet at rehearsal. We're doing it now. Yeah.
Yeah, of course, you know, music.
We work best in crisis mode.
Yeah.
It's right.
Music's an evolution anyway, you know, and an exploration. You start somewhere and you continue.
Because it wasn't a long, hard slog for you, was it? The Island deal seemed to come relatively quickly after the formation of the band.
Well, it was a slog getting there, really. You know, a lot of poverty and sleeping on floors and trying to find somewhere to put a band together and keep it together. But no, once we had actually got a set together and put some, you know, some tunes down on tape, then no, things took off quite quickly.
I mean, we have Leiden to thank really for the tradition of not using producers and the bands producing themselves. He really encouraged this mode, I think, at the time. I mean, that doesn't happen now, does it? You know, but John Lydon is sort of encouraged through interviews and what have you. He encouraged lots of bands at that time to try producing themselves to get their own sound, and we were sort of we took his advice there.
Well, John Peel helped as well.
Yeah,
you know, he was somebody that we listened to avidly, Jazz and I in particular, when we first met. And you know, to find yourself on the Peel show very quickly was a huge boost to us, and sort of gave us the drive to know that we were doing something,
and enabled us to skirt that slog of all the little clubs.
yeah. It went really quickly.
Yeah.
From the time that Peel played, we got my girlfriend to front up the money for the recording with Mark Lasardi. It was the first three tracks that we had, and then someone hung around the BBC and got the single to John Peel. Then he played it non-stop, and then he gave us a session. By the end of that, I mean that 10-week period, we were known throughout Europe and United Kingdom pretty fast.
And supporting Joy Division.
Co-headlining, wasn't it?
It was
Co-headlining.
and we
That's
got
what the ad said.
Yeah.
Yeah, we printed the ads.
And then not long before we have War Dance, again self-produced, but what an enormous difference. You know, this and Requiem kind of defined Killing Joke in the eyes of a post-punk audience, many of whom got on board here and kind of never left. And it was a volatile time, and your sound and lyrics seemed to suit its mood. But what was life like inside the band at this point? And also, Geordie, your guitar suddenly became that wall of sound. It seemed you developed that somewhere in between.
Must have picked up a toy from somewhere. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It was very dub influenced. The engineer was Mark Lasardi on the first single, which I think, you know, Turn to Red was him chopping up tapes and loop tapes.
We listened to a lot of dub.
We, you know, in fact, the dub was the only music we could actually sit in a room together and listen to and not argue. It was actually the one form of music where we actually all just agreed and shut the fuck up. Yeah. But yeah, we just got a bit more rock, maybe because we did some more gigs, and you just kind of feel that that was the sort of edge that was necessary to sort of paint a palette live. Yeah.
And what was influencing you lyrically, Jazz? Because it did become very, with Requiem and War Dance, it was very kind of post-apocalyptic, and that kind of, the subject matter that's always been sort of at the core of Killing Joke somehow came in at that point.
Well, I don't suppose I was very optimistic about the future, or Paul, or any of us at the time. It was, I think it's easily forgotten that, but the Cold War was a very oppressive time. You had the feeling that any second the nuclear war could break out. It was this really dark, oppressive feeling. And yeah, that was when we began to use the lyrics as a way of processing our world really through music. It's a way of processing it, coming to terms with it.
I have to say that Jazz and I wrote a lot of the lyrics together, and still do.
And still do.
And we're both very, very, I think, politically conscious. And things need to be said that aren't, and Killing Joke's a vehicle for us to do that.
And there is a very strong tribalism within that, driven by the drums, like War Dance and Requiem, still when the gatherers get together for a gig, core to the thing, and it is a very tribal experience. Is that
Absolutely.
something driven by the, as you say, the regal instrument in Killing Joke is the drums?
Well, it's basic, and yeah, we're all motivated by a pulse. You know, I don't make any pretense at trying to do anything other than keep that beat and make it as simplistic and as vital as possible.
Follow the Leaders. Dance element is ramped up on here. It was an alternative disco floor filler, but the only single from What's This For? Does that title mirror how EG felt about you at the time? Did the label know how to market you, what to do with you?
I don't think anybody knew what to do with us. They certainly didn't. They were always looking for a hit single, and we were doggedly not. You know, we were doing and do what feels good to us and relevant to us. But chasing singles isn't really part of that. And particularly at that time, I mean, you know, there were, who was out then, Duran Duran and all that sort of thing. And we didn't fit into that. We didn't fit into the Iron Maiden sort of metal slot.
Or punk, for that matter.
Or punk,
yeah.
I think you attracted a punk audience, but yet when Follow the Leaders came out, there's that other core thing to the band, as you said before with Dub. It's chic, you know. It's that driving element.
The dancing.
It would fill the dance floor. That record, I remember that you put it on, and you would get the most unlikely people would suddenly find their feet.
Mm.
So do you think chic was as important in all the elements as everything else?
Sure.
In a way, yeah.
We were playing it non-stop, the Chic album. Remember at Templeton Place in the early days, we listened to a lot of disco. Anything that had strong bass and drums that made us dance. We listened to this more than sort of punk rhythms or punk kind of 4/4 beats. We were into the dub and into the disco.
It was interesting because it broadened the range of the post-punk map, if you will. You know, there was all these punks coming to see you and suddenly discovering that disco, which had been the enemy traditionally, suddenly they realised that, as you say, within them there's that pulse, that beat, and that's the thing. Everybody kind of got it, and it opened a bit of a broader world.
And the second wave of post-punk, or whatever you want to call it, had its mysticism. Had an element of mysticism that wasn't there in the first wave of punk. Certainly Joy Division had an element of this, and Killing Joke certainly did at that time. I remember the review from that second album, and they gave us 5 stars but 1 star morally. and I think this is due to the fact that we would use the lyrics of very, very dark areas just to process things, as we still do. I mean, I went through some time periods in Killing Joke where I actually thought, Killing Joke, is it a force for good? I remember around that time in 81 that we played in Hamburg, and it was a really, really violent gig, and people were beating each other up, and it was packed, and all the shop windows were smashed outside. And I remember talking to you after the gig. And I really started becoming worried that Killing Joke was a negative force, potentially. What am I doing being part of this? But then after a few years of sitting there, I actually found that Killing Joke is a force for good by processing.
Well, it's a catharsis.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yeah, and that's why I think it's prevailed now, because I do think it it gives something to people's lives, and certainly to our lives, that helps us cope with the horrors of the modern world, you know. I mean, there's 26,000 nuclear warheads pointing at each other across the world. There's 435 nuclear power stations that aren't going to be decommissioned. There's another 80 about to be built. And just against this kind of backdrop, it's hard to be optimistic at times. And this musical form helps us adapt and actually adapt to these horrific changes to this planet. I think man's gone in the wrong direction, personally. But it is as it is, and Killing Joke helps us deal with it, helps us process it.
It helps us deal with it, and it helps us emphasise our concern about it.
There's nothing political, really. I think we're concerned citizens. I don't think we've ever had, like Joe Strummer and his boys, like a political slant or being left or any of this kind of thing. We're not. We're just concerned individuals and we've taken no political leaning on with our music at any time.
They're all wrong.
Empire Song. So yeah, this seems to be the breakthrough. It was an irresistible force. Connie Black's worked a little production magic. Even Top of the Pops came corning, but jazz wasn't in. A little more than a hiccup, but still, what a tune.
So what's the question?
The question is, Empire Song, that was when everything kind of came into being. It seemed the world was ready for Killing Joke. It's like, you know, Follow the Leaders had broken out of the kind of indie dance floor, and Empire Song seemed to be the one where there was electricity everywhere.
Yeah, well, it was quite prophetic. I remember.
And therefore, it was time to implode.
That's right. Well, it just was. It just went that way, you know. But I remember the cover of The Sun. It said "Back to Square One." Another empire backfires. I remember seeing this, and after the Falklands incident, and so it sort of captured an interesting time. I remember when that song came out and the Falklands happened, how most of the music industry was really kind of behind Thatcher going to the Falklands. And I was surprised at how many people in the industry, which is kind of a liberal kind of establishment, were so reactionary. And
like
so,
sheep.
And this was a kind of a political awakening for me in a way. And at that point, I really didn't want to live in this country anymore. It's this country, Great Britain, wonderful people, but no history of revolution.